Hi, I am Todd Manley, NCWA's Director of Government Relations. For this portion of the program, we will explore ridgetop to rivermouth water management with two of our federal partners. With me today are Carlos Suarez, the State Conservationist for the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and Paul Souza, the Regional Director for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Pacific Southwest Region. In his role at NRCS, Carlos works with resource conservation districts and other partners to provide one-on-one conservation, technical, and planning assistance to thousands of farms and ranches on voluntary projects that conserve and protect the natural resources on farms, ranches, and private non-industrial forests. Paul oversees Fish and Wildlife Service programs in California, Nevada, and the Klamath Basin of Oregon, implementing federal law and policies including the Endangered Species Act and Migratory Bird Treaty Act. He leads the region's 50 national wildlife refuges, 3 national fish hatcheries, and 13 fisheries and ecological services field offices. For the next 30 minutes, we are going to have a conversation about a vision for fish and wildlife. In particular, Carlos and Paul are going to share with us their thoughts about the role private land partnerships can play in the Sacramento Valley to improve habitat for the region's species. Both of their agencies are actively involved in programs and fund projects to improve the habitat values on private lands. Welcome, Carlos and Paul.
Thank you, Todd. Welcome, and thanks for allowing us to speak today at the NCWA annual meeting. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the conversation with my good friend, Paul.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. We wish we could be all together, but COVID is still with us. But every day is a good day when I get to hang out with Carlos.
Thank you. I'm here.
Thanks, guys. Well, let's get right into it. To start out, the Everglades Restoration Program is often identified as a model for addressing any one of a number of habitat restoration efforts in Northern California. Earlier in your careers, you two worked together in Florida in the Everglades. Based upon your experiences, are there lessons you learned implementing that program that would be helpful as we implement large-scale restoration projects in Northern California?
So, Paul, I'm going to let you start, and I'll follow.
That's great. Yeah, I was trying to remember, Carlos, when we first met each other. I spent time in the Everglades from 2005 to 2011. And I know we overlapped for at least, 3 years? When did you get to Florida?
I got to Florida in 2008. So definitely was between 2008 and 2011.
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying NRCS is my favorite federal agency, maybe my second favorite after the Fish and Wildlife Service. Just an unbelievable connection to farmers and ranchers. And I think Carlos and I share the same philosophy. The best thing we could do for conservation is keeping farmers farming and ranchers ranching and having vibrant economies and communities around rural parts of the country. The Everglades is very near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of my formative years down there and learned the art of partnerships. People think about Everglades restoration. I think it is the flagship ecosystem restoration project in the country. And what's fascinating about it is it's more than just ecosystem restoration. That's definitely at the top of the marquee. But the real beauty in Everglades restoration is it's about common ground and compromise. So it's also about providing water supply for burgeoning coastal populations and farming and ranching in Florida. It's about flood protection. It's as flat as a pancake in Florida. So whenever you talk about moving water, you've got to talk about protecting property. And also it's about ecosystem restoration. So it's a classic example of how people put their differences aside. These different factions are often fighting on a case-by-case basis, but they decided to put their differences aside and come together around things that they cared about. That's water supply, that's clean and healthy environment, that's helping people, that's making sure farmland and ranch land is strong. And they convinced the state and the country to spend $20 billion over 30 years. So it's something that's bigger than any one individual interest, and it's the beauty of compromise. When I think about California, the Sac Valley, the San Joaquin, and the Bay Delta, sometimes I think we need professional help. We need an impetus to be able to come together around common interests and set our differences aside. So the Everglades is a real lesson for us in how differences of opinion and competing views sometimes are actually a great strength if you can just marshal the will to get together and find common ground.
Paul pretty much hit all the high points on this, and he said it very well. When I arrived to Florida in 2008, and just got engaged into not only the conservation of the great state of Florida, the first thing that was brought to my attention is this thing called Florida Everglades Restoration, and how our agency, along with many other federal, state, regional agencies like the water management districts, which in Florida have 5 water management districts, which have a huge, not only funding, but a lot of focus on water quantity, water quality, and so forth. And in particular, the South Florida Water Management District and the Southwest Florida Water Management District were kind of the key partners on the Everglades restoration. It was the looking at how our agency, a non-regulatory agency, federal agency, non-regulatory, working with Paul, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which have regulations, have in their programs some things that are regulatory, working together and actually getting the main partners on this, the farmers, the ranchers, forest land users in Florida, to follow through with our programs and understand that, hey, we are here to honestly help you restore the Everglades or the Northern Everglades, restore your land. And in particular, in our case, utilizing our wetland reserve program funding, which we almost invested $500 million, $500 million in programs, working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, working with entities like Florida Cattlemen Association, working the water management districts, working with the government, with the state of Florida to make that happen. And the key was partnership. You talk about lessons taught, and if anything, I think you heard Paul said it very well, was partnerships. How do we partner and bring our resources, and not just financial resources, technical resources, communication, and so forth, to the forefront, and find common ground? Look for common ground so that we can provide that assistance. And that, to be honest with you, it wasn't just the funding, it was that communication, that partnership that made the Everglades restoration program very successful, and continue to be successful to this day.
If I could just add a little bit more on that, I'll give you one specific example. Another parallel with the Everglades and the Sacramento Valley and the San Joaquin and the Bay Delta is threatened and endangered species are pervasive. Mm-hmm. And one of the charismatic megafauna in the Everglades is the Florida panther. Species almost went extinct. We had about 20 or 30 left in the wild and had to take some pretty unbelievable steps to get that population strong again. People don't know this about Florida, but it's, I think, the #1 cow-calf operation state in the country. So ranching is a huge issue in the Everglades. And for definition's sake, the Everglades start just south of Orlando and extend all the way down through Lake Okeechobee into the famous River of Grass, Everglades National Park to the south. But Florida panthers rely on that ranch land. The most important thing we could do to protect Florida panthers is to keep ranchers ranching. And a lot of that area, Naples, Fort Myers, it's developing. So a lot of that ranch land had been lost to suburb expansion. Carlos's strength, the strength of NRCS, was so powerful because of that wetland reserve program. He was able to find $500 million, found some creative ways to take money from other states that couldn't spend it. And we were able to do big things together, protecting panthers and a massive amount of ranch land in the Everglades headwaters. And again, it's a classic case of how ranching and threatened and endangered species conservation are one and the same. Those ranches are continuing to ranch. They have permanent easements, and they're also providing that habitat for Florida panthers. They will not be lost to urban development. So I'm really proud of that time.
Absolutely, Todd. And just one final thought on that on the end. I appreciate Paul bringing the Florida panther to the conversation, because it was U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NRCS, Army Corps of Engineers, the Nature Conservancy, and the Florida Cattlemen, all working together to make that happen. We acquired, as an example, a plot of land that was critical to make. It was like a bridge, literally a land bridge between the southern part of the Everglades and the northern part of the Everglades, where that Florida Panther will roam. And because of our investment, because of our engagement, we were able to acquire that land, protect it on the easement, make it part of the whole natural preserve that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has, and it was critical. And it shows when partners and where there's will, it can happen. So I'm glad that Paul brought that up, because it's one of those projects that I have dear to my heart.
Yeah, a career moment for sure.
Great, thank you. Boy, the partnerships are so critical, right? I think we're learning that more and more all the time, and just bringing on new partners into what we're working on. So thanks for that. That's really informative. Next, in the Sacramento Valley, we're attempting to manage water and land resources year-round to benefit birds, fish, as well as grow crops and provide water for local communities. Both of your organizations have partnered in projects to make this possible. What do you see as opportunities to further improve this year-round management in the region, and what role can working lands play?
So let me, if I may start on this one, and I know Paul has a lot of good examples that we're collaborating, but it is an excellent question, Todd. And parallel to what we talk about the Everglades, when you look at the San Joaquin Valley, you look at the Delta, you see a lot of parallels. One of the things that NRCS has been doing in the past several years is protecting the tricolor blackbird. Tricolor blackbird is a state protected species that we have used funding not only from the dairy, from NRCS, but also from organizations like Audubon Society, and also the dairy producers, to protect that very critical bird and very critical habitat. Also, in the southern part of the state, we have put a lot of investment on protection of Southwest willow flycatcher. And also, I'd be remiss if I don't mention the work that we are doing in the northern part of California, working with the rice producers to create, using rice fields, to create habitat for migratory birds. Those are few examples of the great work that we are doing with our, again, stressing partnership with our farmers, with our ranchers, forest users, with our other federal agencies like Paul's, and other organizations like Audubon Society, and dairy producers, to protect the habitat, to create habitat, and utilizing our programs like EQIP, to make the environmental quality incentive program, to provide financial assistance to create that. This year in particular, with the 2018, well, it's not so new now, but the 2018 Farm Bill, there is a provision under EQIP that provides incentive payments. And so we're going to use 10% or dedicate up to 10% of our funding to provide incentive payment. And our focus is going to be on pollinators. And we have been coordinated with our great friend, Secretary Karen Ross, on promoting this and utilizing these funds to target areas in the San Joaquin Valley for creating more pollinator habitat. Also, and focusing on soil health, which has been paramount not only for our state agencies, but also for the federal government. But like that, all of that have always seen a common denominator. I have conversations with Paul about all this, and vice versa. How can we, NRCS, continue our enhancement on those habitats, but also how can U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service can support us in that effort as well?
I think that's well said. I really value all of those examples, and we're right at the table with NRCS and partners. The Central Valley is such a fascinating place. The Bay Delta too. There are really kind of different problems in different parts of the Central Valley. The San Joaquin, with Sigma coming, the potential for significant fallowing of farmland. It's relatively water poor compared to the Sacramento Valley. The Sacramento Valley, there's just something special about it. It helps to have more water, truthfully. And there's just a sentiment in the Sacramento Valley about getting things done, finding solutions. We talk a lot about fighting over water in the West, and the Sacramento Valley, I think, is the the gold standard in terms of trying to find solutions and work through a host of very difficult questions. We have a very deep relationship with farming and ranching in the Sacramento Valley. Rice farming, as Carlos mentioned, critically important for our migratory waterfowl and birds of all kinds. We've got about 50,000 acres of refuge lands in the Sacramento Valley and hundreds of thousands of acres in rice. Honestly, we need to keep that rice production going. I worry a little bit when I hear of some conversion of some rice lands. People that know the Sacramento Valley understand how important it is for birds. When the migratory flyway comes down to wintering grounds in California, they spend their days in the refuge complex and then they fly off and go to rice fields to feed at sunset. So it's really unbelievably important wildlife habitat. What can we do to advance it even more? I think that's the essence of your question, Todd. My sense is that there are tremendous tools in California. I've had the chance to work in Washington, D.C., as we've talked about, also in the Everglades. I've had the chance to see a lot of other conservation stories across this country. And I don't think there's any place that has as much capacity for conservation as California. Our state partners are just unbelievable stewards and advocates for environmental conservation. We have a public that cares deeply about a healthy environment. I don't think capacity is really the limiting factor. Sure, we need more. We'll get to some of that a little bit later, I suspect. But making sure we're using all the tools that we can in the most targeted way, I think, is critical. That's Carlos's unbelievable portfolio of conservation mechanisms. It's the Fish and Wildlife Services. It's the strength of the water districts in the Sacramento Valley. It's the farmers and ranchers. It's the state's proposition funding. It's the promise of the voluntary agreements. I just hope we can get those done. We can create another 1.5 billion of capacity for restoration, and finding ways to channel all of this to the most important priorities for the Sacramento Valley, I think, is going to be the key. So I do think on occasion we can have disparate activities, and coordinating them more with a real focus on what's going to get the best bang for the buck for the environment is something I think we can do better.
If I can add to Paul, and just because I think it's very important that I stress what Paul just said about the essence of the question, and that is basically continue to work together. We recognize, both U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, ourselves, we recognize the sensitivity of water issues in the state, in the Sacramento Valley, San Joaquin, and other parts of the state, and especially in the Sacramento Valley. We recognize how sensitive that is. And I totally agree with Paul, what he said on whether we have the resources. The resources, I believe the resources are there. We just have to continue the discussion and the dialogue. And that is an important part. And, it might sound simplistic, but it's the essence. It's having that conversation. Not only bringing those partners that we mentioned, and I'd be remiss again if I don't mention a very key partner or a series of partners in California, our tribal nations. They are key too to make this happen, along with our farmers, other farmers, ranchers, forest land users. For all these entities, non-government organizations, environmental organizations, being all of them on the table, you say, what are the resources that we have? What are the challenges? What can U.S. Fish NRCS can do? What can Paul can do from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service? And then just put that together. It's not going to happen with a switch, turning on a switch, but it can happen, and it will take time. But it's the coordination, and having that coordination and that communication is definitely critical and the key to all this.
Great, thank you. We touched a little bit on the Pacific Flyway in the prior question, but just getting a little more specific, it's described as the ecological success story of our generation here in California. And private land partnerships provide a large portion of the acres of habitat that create the flyway in the Sacramento Valley, as you both mentioned. Both of your organizations are driving forces in creating this habitat on private lands. What can be done to protect the lands currently providing habitat? And are there additional opportunities to increase the habitat acreage and or the values of habitat in the region?
Yeah, Carlos, let me take a first crack at this one, and then I'll pass it to you.
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, like I said, irrigated agriculture is the foundation with the refuge system of the Pacific Flyway. And we take deep pride in that fact. The private land and the refuge lands work hand in glove to support these birds. You know, if you look across the country, birds are in crisis. And the one exception to the rule is the flyways. And I think it's a testament to the thoughtfulness of the creation of the refuge system. The first waterfowl refuge ever created by the Fish and Wildlife Service was in 1908, Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge, Northern California. And it was a flagship, and it remains a flagship, especially when water is available. That's the key. But the interconnection is just so critical between irrigated agriculture and bird conservation. It's the one exception to the rule of the bird crisis that we're facing in this country. And we're really proud of that. And I think we need to do everything in our power to continue to cultivate that partnership. And as I mentioned, bringing all these different tools together, Carlos's amazing capacity. I didn't mention the Land and Water Conservation Fund yet, but last year the Congress passed permanent annual appropriations for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, $900 million for the country. Half of that probably will go to the Park Service, half of that to the Fish and Wildlife Service. So this is yet another tool where we can purchase interest in land and or water, finding ways to help rice growers and farmers and ranchers broadly in the Sacramento Valley with easement dollars. Carlos's suite of tools is right there. The Land and Water Conservation Fund will be another powerful force for conservation good. The voluntary agreements, and we're talking $1.5 billion if we can get them done. I applaud the governor and his leadership around getting the voluntary agreements completed. It will be a wonderful day for California's conservation future if we can make that so. So bringing these tools together with a thoughtful, forward-looking plan is I think, the answer to your question, Todd. We need to find ways to keep farmers farming and ranchers ranching, and if we do, the birds will be fine.
And thank you, Paul. And Paul just gave me an excellent segue on keeping farmers farming. What we do as an agency when we provide conservation is to allow those producers to continue farming, to continue doing it in a sustainable manner, protecting the environment, protecting the natural resources. Because at the end of the day, those natural resources are the ones that are feeding the nation, are the ones that are feeding the world. I always, when I talk with friends and other colleagues, and I brag about our state, and our state, this fact that said if we were a separate nation, we would be the number 5 economy in the world. And also the fact that we are the number 1 ag state, not only in the nation, but I will say, one of the top 5 in the world as well. That didn't come by chance. That didn't happen by chance. That happened because our farmers, our ranchers, our forest land users are cognizant of protecting those resources and understand the interaction between our resources and also wildlife habitat. And I want to use that as an example, as a segue to the work that we have done with the rice growers in the state. For the past 15 years, rice growers came to the table and said, we want to continue farming. We're going to continue farming, but we definitely want to continue doing it in a sustainable manner, but also understanding, and they understood and understand and understood then and understand now very well how the rice fields can act as fields to enhance wildlife habitat. So we have been working with them to that matter, and with an outstanding success in protecting migratory birds, allowing the flyway to go through those rice fields, benefit from the habitat that is being created. So to that, using that as an example, we can continue doing the same thing along with other crops in other areas, utilizing our easement programs as an example. NRCS, just the same way as we did in Florida. We can do similar things here in California, utilizing easements, wetland reserve easements, also the farmland preservation or the agricultural lands easement programs to protect that land and make it not only sustainable for farming, but also sustainable for wildlife habitat. And again, working with all our partners. And I keep stressing the word partnership because Paul cannot do this by himself. I cannot do this by ourselves. We just can't. And even if we join our forces, we still have a lot of gaps and opportunities. And that's why partners are key. Our farmers, ranchers, forest users, resource conservation districts, which I haven't mentioned, and they are one of our top partners on this. Government agencies like CDFA, Department of Conservation, who would, an excellent partner to us. Wade Crawford and the Department, Secretary Crawford and the Department of Natural Resources. Carla Namath with Water Resources, all those agencies, state and federal agencies working together to make this happen. And I know it can be done. Paul and I have no questions about that it can be done.
I'll just echo it. We have a wonderful partner in the state of California, Wade, Chuck, Carla. We're on speed dial, and the relationship between the federal and state government is just so important and powerful. And I really believe the future is bright.
All right. Well, welcome back, Paul. Unfortunately, you lost power there at Cottage Way, but I'm glad you're able to use your phone and make it work. So thanks. It's kind of the era that we're living in right now. We've got to make do with what we have.
So the best laid plans. It's just sort of a freakish moment. We lost power in the entire building at Cottage Way, but we will persevere.
Well, welcome back. And boy, it was interesting because I was just doing a plug for the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge's auto loop when the power went out, and just wanting to make sure that the annual meeting attendees, if they haven't gone up to see it, that they give it a look, because it's just such an incredible asset in the valley. So thanks.
That's a fact. We still have a lot of birds there, although they're heading home to their breeding grounds. Great.
Well, thanks. Well, we're moving now just to the last question that I have for you guys today. It's in regards to floodplain reactivation, something that's, we're all actively engaged in the Sacramento Valley. And, recent studies funded by your organizations have contributed to the science identifying the value of floodplain reactivation in the Sacramento Valley on both the wet side of the levees, in the bypasses and along the river channels, and on the dry side of the levees in what was part of the historic floodplain and now is agricultural land and managed wetlands. While the value of these lands to birds has been known for a while, we now are developing a better understanding of the value to fish, particularly to migrating Chinook salmon. Looking forward, what role do you see for your agencies in advancing the science and increasing the utilization of these lands?
So if I can take a stab and allow, and I know Paul has a lot on this subject as well, but one of the things, first, we have been working, and I mentioned the rice, but also we have working with partners to promote the use of salmon, or actually use the land to increase the number of salmons and raising salmons in those floodplains. And we are in I believe, the second year, going into our third year of the study. And the study has shown a lot of promise as far as what can be done using those floodplains to raise salmon in the Sacramento Valley and those floodplain areas. And we're looking forward to once the study is completed, because I think it's going to yield a lot of great information that it can be utilized to not only formulate policies, but also formulate programs that can assist in that endeavor. The other thing is, from NRCS, we have programs, conservation programs that have been utilized very successfully in other parts of the nation and here in California as well. And Sacramento Valley, I see it as a prime for that, and that is our watershed program, where we look at a watershed. We take the watershed approach and look at the resources. What are the resources needs in that watershed? What are the opportunities that watershed offers? And how can we bring all those together so that we can address those resource concerns, whether it's migratory birds, whether it's water conservation, utilizing better utilization of the water to redistribute the water across the floodplains and so forth, to make it available for farmers and ranchers for farming. And even air quality as an example that can be also being addressed on that. In addition, we have the Farm Bill, the 2014 Farm Bill created the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And that is a program within a conservation program within the Farm Bill that allows partners and the federal government, in this case NRCS, to bring one-to-one match of funding, or one-to-one or more funding, to target a specific part of the state, whether it's a watershed, it can be a county, it can be a small area that it has a significance to the state or multi-state. And we envision seeing a lot more projects coming through the RCPP program that can target watersheds like the Sacramento Valley. So that is an area that I'm very excited to see our partners coming together with and applying for this program with NRCS supporting those efforts, where we can target the Sacramento Valley and look at those resource concerns, and in this case, the Sacramento Valley, the water conservation, water quality that it offers. Paul?
Well, I think that's well said, Carlos. And, I've got to tell you, if I had to pick one exciting landscape scale conservation concept for California, it would be revitalizing floodplains in the Sacramento Valley. And that's saying something. California is a beautiful state. We've got gorgeous deserts and big mountains and big rivers and an unbelievable coastline, beautiful beaches, rocky coasts as well. So it's hard to pick and choose. But the energy around revitalizing floodplains in the Sacramento Valley, I think, is unparalleled. And because of the wonderful partnerships we have with farmers and ranchers and communities in the Sacramento Valley, I think we could go fast. We've all known for a long time the important relationship between farms, ranches, and bird conservation with our refuges and all of the partnerships that we have across government and non-government. But there is a growing clear understanding that revitalizing floodplains could help us with one of the hardest conservation questions we face in this great state, and that's recovering salmon. The late, great Steve Thompson, he sat in this chair, a couple of regional directors before me, before he passed on far too early. He would say, Paul, all we need is $1 billion. If we can restore the floodplains in the Sacramento Valley, knock down those levees, spread the water across the landscape, slow it down, we can recover salmon. Can we do that, Paul? Just $1 billion. So I think we probably need more than $1 billion, but his sentiment is right on. And it just makes sense. When you restore floodplains in a way that is compatible with continued farming and ranching, you're going to do things that help the environment in a very significant way. Floodplains are among the richest habitats that we have for species of all kinds. They help birds, they help mammals, and they're critically important for fisheries. So now we really are turning the corner from not only recognizing the value of the Sacramento Valley to our birds, but also to seeing how floodplain revitalization with willing partners can help us with the hardest problems that we face for our fisheries. That in tandem with our hatcheries and the work that we're doing with the state of California and so many others. The voluntary agreements, again, could be an engine for conservation with Carlos's portfolio, with the Land and Water Conservation Fund, with potential proposition funding from the state. We could get big things done fast in the Sacramento Valley and help to address one of the thorniest challenges that we face in conservation in California, and that's the plight of our fisheries.
I want to say something to that effect, and it's to reemphasize Paul's point. We had a former chief, good friend of mine, Dave White. And when Dave was chief of the agency, he created the landscape initiatives. And one of the reasons why he created landscape initiatives in the agency was because he And I totally agree. When he said that, it's like, wow, yeah, it does makes total sense. As an agency, we were known to do really good random acts of conservation. You know, we put practice here, practice there, work with a few farms here and there. Yet, and we were doing great, and we're doing great work. There's no question about that. But we needed to look more landscape and more of a watershed approach. And to Paul's point, this is definitely an example of how you can take resources. How can you take the partnership, the resources that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NRCS, brings to the table, and other entities, local, state, other federal agencies, and put them in a very important landscape, not just to California, because this is the other thing. The reason why the Everglades was so successful is because the Everglades wasn't just Florida. It was the nation. Same with the Sacramento Valley. Sacramento Valley is not just California. It's our nation. It has a relevance and importance to the nation and to the nation's food supply and to the nation's resources. That's why we, Paul and I, are so passionate about it, because we know that leveraging our resources and providing support, we can make that happen.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Carlos. It was a reminder. Chief White, when he was in charge of NRCS, such a card. I'm sure he still is in his retirement, doing some consulting work. But I'll tell you a funny story. I was in D.C. I was the deputy assistant director for the Endangered Species Program at the time, and I remember having a meeting with Chief White and our director at the time, Dan Ash. And Chief White came into our conference room and he said, "Hello, my name is Chief White from the NRCS, a wholly owned subsidiary of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service." And you know, the point that he was making is that what you said, Carlos, that, you know, our strength is when we can channel our priority work and the capacity that NRCS has and the relationships they have with farmers and ranchers to things that matter. We created a program called Working Lands for Wildlife, where we identified species and ecosystems that we wanted to prioritize because they mattered to farmers and ranchers, they mattered for wildlife conservation, they mattered to NRCS. And we were able to create real synergy. We did it in the Everglades, $500 million because of Carlos's magic. We can do it in the Sacramento Valley. I really believe the future is bright. We're at a moment in time right now where we can move beyond the acrimony that we've seen too often in recent years and create real speed for conservation and keeping working lands vibrant in a way that is going to open up recovery for fisheries, in addition to providing the benefits that we've seen for birds. I think we've got a real chance over the next few years to go very fast and to be part of something special in the Sacramento Valley. The Sacramento Valley is the place we can go fastest, most quickly. And the challenge that I think we have is we need to make sure we can identify the priorities. What are the most important things that we want to invest in the next 3 to 5 years? Everglades was brilliant, and I believe it is the most successful ecosystem restoration effort in the world. For many reasons, because again, common ground, people put their differences aside and decided to work as partners and work on shared goals and get them done, and convincing the country that this is a priority. And by the way, 67 projects that were identified that were the most important ones to restore the integrity of the Everglades from headwaters to the Florida Keys. So we need a Sacramento Valley plan where we can identify the top 25 projects and be in a position with science to determine, once we get them done, the benefits that we're seeing. So that's our challenge. We need to take the next step and be more specific, and then take advantage of this tremendous moment in time to go as fast as we can for conservation and farming and ranching.
Totally agree with everything that Paul said.
Well, great. Well, thank you both. Thanks for rolling with the punches today with the technology and the electricity going out. And thank you for taking time to discuss a vision for fish and wildlife with us today. I look forward to our continued work as partners in the Sacramento Valley on projects and programs that we discussed here today. So thank you again.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it. And thank you, Paul, for, again, having so much fun talking about our passion for conservation.
Yeah, it's always a good day when I get to hang out with Carlos, like I said at the beginning. And I'll just say thank you to everyone in the Sacramento Valley. Thank you for your partnership. Let's get big stuff done. I think we can. I know we can.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.